When Big Rob opened the door to his bar, out on the frosty slopes of the Yukon, a snowdrift rolled in after him. It took him and his wife together to force the door closed again. It wasn't like he had any hands to spare. He was holding a strangely shaped object, carefully wrapped in brown packing paper. None of the regulars looked up as he unwrapped it, too engrossed in either their conversations or their beers. Long-haul truckers, oil rig workers with the weekend off, couples who'd wanted a rugged adventure vacation and now were vacationing in the world's frosty backwaters. The usual suspects, muttering in English, French, and Algonquin, nursed their whiskeys, the cheapest way to stay warm on these long, cold winter nights. Only one head turned when Big Rob, owner of Big Rob's Tavern, the only watering hole for miles of Canadian hinterlands, wrested the package from the paper. Eddie, a local Algonquin construction worker who propped up the bar from time to time. He felt as though a chill had just swept into the room, not from the cold outside, but something deeper, more intangible. It was the deer-like skull in Big Rob's hand, with a pair of jagged antlers sticking out of the top. A perfect new piece of wall decor, between the old license plates and big-mouth billy basses. But Eddie had heard the stories from the elders. He knew about the hungry horrors that lurk in the dark and felt the ravenous energy that radiated off of that skull. Without a word, he got up from his seat and walked out the front door of the bar, into the unforgiving cold of the night. He knew that anything he said would be dismissed as superstition, but he also knew that anyone left in that bar was as good as dead, and he refused to be among the corpses. Well, if there even were other corpses. Big Rob didn't pay any attention to Eddie's exit. He was too focused on getting the skull up on the wall. Ever since he'd collected it from the post office, he was feeling oddly hungry. Maybe just because he skipped lunch. Once the skull was presiding over his bar, he could get himself some dinner and rid himself of the gnawing pain in his gut. At first, nobody seemed to even notice it was there, the seconds turning into minutes, and those minutes slowly ticking towards the first hour. It wasn't until that first hour passed that the patrons and staff of Big Rob's Tavern started to act a little strangely. They became twitchy, on edge, itching at their skin and scratching at the wood of their tables or the bar. The rockabilly music playing out of the nearby jukebox was soon replaced by a low groan of empty stomachs, the raw sound of hunger, drool dripping from slack jaws. Slowly, eyes around the bar began to turn towards the mounted skull, staring down at them all with that eyeless stare. They heard whispers deep inside their own skulls. "Honor your hunger, my children. It's all for you. Eat, eat, eat." Their minds were filled with images. Meat, red, bloody, raw, delicious. The patrons looked around and met each other's eyes. "Yes, my children," said the voice. "Take up my mantle and become who you were meant to be." Around the bar, everyone drew weapons. Some were lucky enough to have brought switchblades and buck knives and K-bars. Others had to make do with cutlery, broken bottles, or whatever other sharp or heavy objects were close to hand. The skull seemed to watch, indifferent, as the patrons descended on each other in a fit of animalistic rage. Not a word exchanged, just growls and screams, a sacrament of blood and terror, of teeth sinking into exposed flesh, as the patrons and staff attacked and scrambled over each other. All of them were hoping for one thing: to get their hands on that beautiful, precious skull, the one that had whispered these beautiful, sweet ideas into their minds. They would honor their hunger and honor their great and terrible master. It seemed appropriate that it was Big Rob himself, bloodied and injured, who climbed on top of the sprawling pile. He prized the skull away from the wooden panels with broken fingernails and brought it up to his face. He didn't know why, just that it was what he needed to do. And the second he felt the strangely warm bone against the cold skin of his face, the transformation began in earnest. The man that was once Big Rob was gone. When the skull touched his face, his tissue started melting onto the bone, bonding on a molecular level. His body began to seize and spasm, spine ramrod straight, as the other patrons of the bar instinctively backed away, sensing a true apex predator in their presence. They could hear the sound of Rob's bones cracking from outside the bar, his arms and legs jerking and twisting at impossible angles as they began to lengthen out. His skin took on a mottled hue as coarse, scratchy follicles forced their way out of his pores. When Rob screamed in pain, it echoed out of the skull as a terrible, primal howl. His bottom jaw also cracked and stretched, revealing a seemingly bottomless maw full of needle teeth. Long, razor-edged claws forced their way out of his toes and fingertips, and the skull's antlers seemed to stretch out and fill the sky. He'd been ripped and warped into this obscene creature, a dark echo of a human, rail-thin, corpse-like. Nobody else in the bar could even move before its terrible majesty. Then, the feeding began. He reached out with one of his unnaturally long arms and grabbed the nearest patron, still bloodied from the fight. He would do. The unfortunate patron was about to squeeze out the first third of a scream before the monster's jaws closed around his face. Hours later, a task force of the SCP Foundation would arrive on the premises. They wouldn't be the first ones called, of course. Several members of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police arrived on horseback in response to reports of screaming and sounds of violence coming from Big Rob's tavern. The SCP Foundation took an interest when those Mounties never reported back, and neither did the second team of Mounties sent to provide reinforcements to the first. What the team discovered was the aftermath of a horror story. The half-ruined remains of the tavern, filled with bloody bones and scraps of fabric. The walls were peppered with rifle shots from the Mounties before whatever was inside came bursting out of the front door. What happened to the Mounties was reasonably clear from the huge red patches soaking into the snow. Their mounts hadn't been spared either, as was illustrated by the tattered saddles and discarded horseshoes in the snow.
So hungry you could eat a horse. Or several, I guess,
said the squad leader as he engaged his night vision viewfinder. Nobody laughed. Not even him. On the way down, they'd encountered Eddie, bundled up in his coat. One of the MTF squad members had stopped to ask him if he had any idea what was going on, and he had but one terse word for them.
Wendigo.
Back at the ruined tavern, the dying lights of the building cast the dense Canadian forest behind it as a castle of dancing shadows. You didn't need to be a detective to notice the chain of oversized red hand and footprints leading back into the tree line. Clearly, whoever had turned all these poor people into a buffet had retreated into the forest to digest.
Okay,
said the squad leader as he shouldered his assault rifle.
Let's go give our hungry diner his just desserts. Keep a tight formation. Helmet cams on, comms open. Separation is death out here.
The team complied, around 10 of them in total. All experienced operatives of the SCP Foundation that had encountered violent and terrifying anomalies before. Each had a high-powered assault rifle with several extra magazines on their person, a combat knife, and even a couple grenades affixed to each of their belts, just in case. But as they marched into the forest, the narrow beams of their helmet flashlights cutting through the seemingly infinite dark, they couldn't help but wonder whether it would be enough. Even in the frigid temperatures of midwinter, the squad could feel an immense heat emanating from somewhere in the forest. None of them had any idea what they were up against, and could only hope that bullets would even harm it. The cursed object behind it all would later be designated SCP-323, the Wendigo Skull, named for the Algonquin legend of a spirit of dark hunger. But out here, to the team on the ground, it was just an unknown horror in the wood. They kept searching, beams leaping from tree to tree, trying to triangulate the source of every rustled leaf or cracking twig. Shadows danced in their crosshairs, sweeping for anything that might have been the source of the chaos they'd seen back at the tavern. The mobile task force agent trailing the pack, Emil Vasquez, was so focused on keeping up with the team, he didn't even notice the long-fingered hand descending from the canopy. All his teammates heard was a muffled yelp and a meaty crunch, as the man they'd been on so many missions with was devoured in the dark. The other trailing squad members turned and opened fire, bullets ripping through the trees, but failing to come into contact with anything made of flesh and blood. Moments later, A long, loping figure charged through the center of the team formation, impossibly strong for its emaciated build, and raked a claw through the air. One of the team members was a little too close and died when the claws slashed his flesh. The squad leader was only slightly luckier, the claws wounding him in the stomach, knocking him against a nearby tree. With the leader down, formation broke, and the surviving team members tried to find refuge in the dark. They had no idea that what they were fighting and trying to evade was so much more than just another monster of flesh and blood. It was a dark god of pure appetite, bound to a physical object, in this case, the deer-like skull. For most, the last thing they saw before jaws closed around them were the warped shadows of antlers cast in the beams of their flashlights. The forest rang now with gunshots and screams. Little by little, even these fell silent as the Wendigo claimed its meals. They'd sent mere men to subdue a beast older than history, and would likely be here long after humanity had eaten each other down to the last man, a process that the skull hoped to hasten.
Washington! Vasquez! Hodder! Anyone!
The squad leader barked into his mouthpiece. There was no reply. The dull ache from the wound in his gut was growing as the adrenaline wore off, every step carrying him further into the dark copse of trees where so many other animals had once wandered off to die. Between every step and the crunches of snow that came with them, he could hear that thing out in the trees, moving with speed that even his well-honed reflexes couldn't hope to match. If it could find him, it would devour him like all the others before reinforcements could arrive. And even with almost no ammunition left, his gun felt like it was getting heavier and heavier by the moment. That's when he tripped on a root beneath the snow and collapsed against a nearby tree. He willed himself to get up, to keep fighting, but it was like his nervous system was ignoring his commands. As he bled out, his legs lost all sensation. He thought dying out here in the snow would be cold, but no. A feeling of terrible calm and warmth washed over him. He blinked, and suddenly, the shape was crawling towards him out of the darkness of the trees and into the illumination of his helmet light. As it climbed up the length of the squad leader's body, he smelled its breath, stinking of sweet rot, needle teeth shining. But the squad leader smiled and gave a quiet laugh, something that seemed to confuse even the antlered horror, until it looked down and saw the grenade clenched in the squad leader's fist, the pin already pulled.
Bon appetit.
The explosion shook the forest. The burst of flames gave the Foundation helicopters in the distance something to fly towards. They'd been watching a live feed of the doomed squad's helmet cameras to understand the monster they were up against, seeing each of their comrades fall in the process. But in doing so, they'd brought this night of horrors to a close. When the reinforcements rappelled down from the choppers into the epicenter of the blast, they found the charred corpse of Big Rob. The comms crackled into life.
Target neutralized.
A flashlight scanned the surrounding area. A few feet away from Big Rob's mangled corpse lay the deer-like skull that had been affixed to his head, completely unharmed by the explosion. The Wendigo skull was taken and put into containment, given the Euclid class for its unpredictable nature. To this day, it sits in the bowels of a Foundation containment site, hungry for another human connection, hungry to once again bestow its terrible gift, and above all, just hungry. Check out the Dr. Bob Patreon and become a junior researcher today. Now go and watch another entry from the files of Dr. Bob, like SCP-5056, The Constant Companions.